As a writer of ghost stories, many people often ask me, have you ever really seen a ghost? How do your stories sound so real? Others might mock, if you haven't seen a ghost, how can you describe them so accurately? Are you just making things up? I would seriously and honestly answer that question. Most of the time, I just make things up. I hear stories, then I retell them for you. Although deep down, I've always wanted to encounter a ghost just once, to see what it's like, what kind of form it takes, to always make the living so curious, even terrified. To be honest, many of my family members work in fields connected to the spiritual, specifically jobs related to the dead. My maternal grandfather, Grandpa Lee, during his lifetime, worked as an exhumation specialist, a skill he later passed on to his son, Uncle John, who continued the trade. My maternal grandmother, Grandma Lee, sold votive offerings. Everything revolved around this profession. I myself have often accompanied Grandpa Lee to exhume and clean bones for people. Many nights in the middle of winter, with a drizzle and northern winds whipping across the rice paddies, there was no electricity like there is now. Only a storm lantern, a torch, and a fire. Grandpa Lee would meticulously feel for each bone, washing them clean with fragrant water. Then, he'd carefully arrange the bones into a ceramic urn, lined with red cloth. After that, he'd place it inside a larger casket, and only then would it be carried to the newly designated grave. Of course, working in such a profession, accidents were common. Grandpa Lee once recounted a particularly difficult case. A body that had been buried for nearly a year showed no signs of decomposition. It had bloated up but remained completely intact. A foul, pungent odor filled the air, sending the deceased's family and children screaming and running away in terror. Grandpa Lee himself was terrified then. But if he left, who would finish the job? He had already agreed to help them. So he just stooped down, used a coconut shell to scrape off all the clinging flesh and water from the bones, cleaned them quickly and thoroughly, and returned them to the family. It's hard to imagine what Grandpa Lee must have felt, all alone in a desolate field, next to an intact, bloated corpse. If he weren't a brave man, he surely would have quit the profession. Now my uncle, Grandpa Lee's son, whom I call Uncle John, works as a ceremonial priest. His two sons are brilliant. The elder, Tom, was once a resident doctor at a prestigious medical university. I don't know how, but he switched to forensic medicine for the police. The younger, Ben, also studied forensic medicine, but works for the medical department. He often sits in those Red Cross vans with the flashing lights that people see at fatal accidents. He's responsible for transporting those bodies to the hospital or the city's forensic center. In short, their job is to collect accident victims' bodies when ordered. Ben is roughly my age. My relationship with these two isn't particularly close. Their work is quite dirty, and we haven't met in years. When we do, it's usually just polite small talk. They're a bit standoffish, so there isn't much opportunity for deeper conversation. However, about a month ago, the local government launched a huge project. All villagers with graves had to relocate them because the entire area was earmarked for development. My family and the Khang family, descendants from generations back, had been disputing a particular grave. Due to land reforms, many ancestral graves had been lost. Our ancestors only vaguely remembered locations, so they just roughly built graves wherever they thought fit. The Khang family also claimed this particular grave, so both families lit incense together. With this new development, the two families discussed and agreed to exhume and see what lay beneath. And indeed, we were mistaken. My family had been worshipping the Khang family's ancestor, while the Khang family had been worshipping ours. Yet, no one had ever appeared in a dream to tell us. After the work was done, the two families held a celebratory feast. Everyone left except for me and the two brothers, Tom and Ben, who stayed until the very end. Once we were a bit tipsy, the conversation turned to work. I mentioned I wrote ghost stories. Their eyes widened, looking at me in surprise. I chuckled and said, "Don't look at me like that. If you were starving, you'd crawl for it. I've written so much that I've become a master embellisher, you know." Ben then asked, "Uncle, since you're directly involved with the dead in your work, do you really believe there are ghosts in this world? Do you have any interesting stories? I could use some inspiration for my writing. I'm completely out of ideas." Tom, who works in forensic medicine, smiled at me and said, "Believe what you want, it's fine. It's everyone's personal opinion. If I said no and then you asked for proof, I'd be screwed. Only those who experience it directly can truly understand and feel it." He added, "But people always say, What you worship is sacred, what you believe is real, what you endure brings peace. Everything has a reason. Then he showed me photos on his phone. Looking at those pictures almost made me throw up. I was trembling like a leaf. Inside were many images of autopsied corpses of all kinds. In short, they were more gruesome than any horror pictures online. I offered him another drink and asked, "Tom, since you're in that field, constantly dealing with corpses, you must have encountered quite a few inexplicable cases, perhaps related to the supernatural, right?" Tom coldly drained his glass and said, "Plenty, but we believe more in science and technology. Of course, we've encountered many strange and mysterious cases that can't be explained, but I'll tell you about them sometime. If you follow me, I guarantee you'll have enough stories to write for a lifetime. I'm busy with work, not just chatting." Perhaps it was the alcohol, but his usual reserved demeanor had become much more open. He looked at me meaningfully and said, "Our work is quite sensitive, so if you write about it, please don't use our names. We can't let emotions guide our work because it involves the law and the truth. Many people die for unknown reasons, even murders that can't speak for themselves. So I'm the one who finds the cause and helps them speak and seek justice. But there are many cases that are hard to explain, Uncle." Tom looked at me with a serious expression. I was speechless, unsure what to say. Perhaps being in that line of work changed his perspective, making his way of speaking completely different from mine. To make the story as authentic as possible, I will still use their names. What's in a name anyway? He raised his glass and invited me to continue. "Earlier, you said you haven't written many ghost stories yet, and that you just make things up. But you've been writing for a long time. It's true that sometimes I run out of ideas, and my working style is to write works that have some meaning, that readers and listeners can take something away from, not just fast food stories written to make a quick buck. That kind of writing is simple, but I don't like it. Do I look like I'm making things up? If you don't believe me, back in school, I studied literature and constantly competed in regional and provincial contests." Tom looked at me for a long time, then laughed and said, "It's simple, Uncle. I see many writers who travel a lot and attend creative camps. But you were a poor student back then, barely leaving home, yet now you're a writer, telling stories from your house." "It's quite a coincidence," I burst out laughing. He was right. My academic performance back then was not even a tenth of Tom's and Ben's. They went to specialized high schools and then passed the entrance exams to medical university, which is not easy. And after several years of medical school, they went on to residency that's truly formidable. Ben, his younger brother, also studied medicine, but I must admit, while his academic prowess isn't equal to his brother's, he has a talent for writing. He used to win district and provincial writing contests, no joke. However, due to several family incidents later on, my studies were interrupted, leaving me half-baked. Tom took a bite of roast duck, chewed it quickly, then looked at me and said, "You need to travel more to find good plots and ideas. Come to Hanoi with me sometime, I'll treat you to beer and show you plenty of ghost stories. And if you come with me, I'll show you many interesting things. The important thing is, are you scared of ghosts?" I thumped my chest confidently. "Me? Scared? I write ghost stories, make up ghosts. Am I a fake?" Ben, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "Don't people say writers lie and reporters exaggerate? You guys are masters of manipulation, leading public opinion astray. Come on, have a drink, Uncle. Don't argue with us, we've seen things firsthand. This time, I'm a bit scared myself." It was true, just as Tom and Ben said, I was all talk. I had never actually met a ghost. But they, on the other hand, dealt with corpses and the dead as part of their job. They told me I could make up ghost stories for others, but to ask me to go out in the middle of the night, leaving my wife, to watch them perform forensics on a corpse I'd rather die. Just hearing about it sent shivers down my spine. Ben is also in forensic medicine, but on the medical side, not the police side like Tom. In general, both deal with the dead. To put it simply, if it's a normal traffic fatality, the medical forensics team handles it. If it involves a criminal act or suspicion, the police forensics team takes the lead. Sometimes they work together. However, these are their professional matters, so I won't go into too much detail. At this point, Ben looked at Tom and smiled. "We don't really believe in flying ghosts or anything, but there are things that aren't quite scientific enough to explain, yet not entirely supernatural or ghostly either." I then asked, "What about those body possession cases people talk about?" I pulled out my phone to show them a video of an old woman who supposedly died and came back to life. then exhibited abnormal behaviors like eating a lot and having strange eyes. The brothers chuckled at the video and said, "That's just for likes and views, uncle. Kids nowadays, they'll put their old grandma on social media for a few likes. Besides, with technology and AI, they can edit anything." Ben continued, "You know about postmortem reflexes or gas buildup in the abdomen, right? Bodies don't always lie still like we imagine. So sometimes, things happen that living people think are abnormal, but they're just perfectly normal human reactions." The two brothers with their medical backgrounds spoke about these specialized topics so naturally, but truthfully, I didn't understand a thing. Still, I was curious, so I didn't interrupt. Ben continued, "But there are some cases that we simply cannot explain. And these cases don't happen in the morgue, they happen right in front of many living people." At this, even Tom looked at his younger brother with a puzzled expression. I took a gulp of my drink, and Ben fell silent for a moment before recounting. "A few years ago, I was dispatched to pick up an old man who had died at his home in a city suburb. He died in the daytime. Hospital doctors confirmed his heart had stopped. The family had completed all the funeral rites. The body hadn't even been put in the refrigerator, so they called the funeral home car early. When the old man was lifted onto the stretcher, he looked completely normal. His arms were pale and cold, and his body was starting to stiffen. His eyes were tightly shut, and his pupils were dilated. I felt no pulse. These were all signs of someone who had been dead for several hours. After the rituals were completed, I and a driver from the same agency put the old man in the car, closed the door, and started driving to the hospital where I worked. But at one point on the road, the stretcher shook slightly. I turned my head back and was startled to see the old man's eyes slowly opening. Panicked, I slapped the driver's shoulder. The driver, being new to the job, slammed on the brakes so hard we almost flipped the car. I was a bit dazed, but I jumped out to check. I saw the old man's eyes darting around, though fractured, as if trying to say something. His mouth was agape, his eyes still had a watery gleam, slowly searching for something. Immediately, the old man was rushed back to the hospital for emergency care. But this time, by the time he arrived, he truly passed away. The on-duty doctors reconfirmed the time of death as just a few minutes prior. When Ben told us this, not only I, but Tom also felt it was strange. After another drink, Ben continued, "This is the strangest case I've ever encountered. Clearly, the old man had died several hours earlier. I can't explain this medically. In general, there are many bizarre occurrences. I had already checked his body thoroughly before, and yet there it was." Tom then said, "That's what they call hoi quang fan chiu, death reflection." I had never encountered such a case, but often, even at my workplace, there were many strange stories. Light bulbs flickering wildly, furniture moving by itself in an empty room, and many other inexplicable things. To say that spiritual matters aren't real is clearly wrong, but I've come to one conclusion: ghosts never spontaneously harm people. Everything has a cause. Ben remained silent, not contradicting, implying that this explanation made sense for his case. "What is death reflection, uncle?" Ben asked Tom, but Tom was currently deeply inhaling on his cigarette. I, being a writer, had researched it, so I explained. To put it simply, it's like this. Take a phone whose battery is about to die, or an oil lamp that's running out of fuel. Just before it goes out completely, the light might suddenly flare up very brightly, then quickly extinguish. A final, desperate flicker. With people who are about to die, they might suddenly become strangely lucid. They might speak clearly, their eyes might brighten, some might even move their bodies even if they were lying perfectly still moments before. But this isn't a recovery, it's the last burst of energy, concentrated into one final effort before everything shuts down. It's just that simple. "So what about body possession?" I asked. It was late by then, almost night, and Ben had nearly finished 2 liters of wine. My tolerance wasn't as good as theirs, and I couldn't even remember what I had said. I don't know if it was the alcohol or something else, but he rambled from one story to another, then threw up on the table and passed out. The conversation with Tom and Ben ended there, as they had to carry me home. It was truly embarrassing. I had even promised to go with them one day to experience cleaning up dead bodies, but I suppose that was just talk, fueled by wine, to keep the conversation going. I would never actually go out in the middle of the night to watch them do forensics. My hometown is only about 20 kilometers from my house, not too far. My house is on the other side of the Red River, so I have to cross a ferry, It's so large it's more like a proper ferry than a small boat, usually fitting 4 cars and dozens of motorbikes with plenty of space left. But that day, something felt incredibly strange, like an omen. Normally, encountering 1 or 2 fatal accidents in a month was rare. That day, I witnessed 3 deaths in a row, all bizarre and inexplicably strange. The first incident was the one that made me feel the most remorse. As my car drove onto the ferry, I noticed many people pointing down at the surface of the Red River, as if they'd spotted a drowned body. Curious, I looked in the direction they pointed. On the river, there was an object floating aimlessly downstream. From a distance, I couldn't tell if it was male or female. A few people exclaimed loudly. An old woman accompanying the ferry trip clasped her hands together, chanting prayers, Namo Amitabha Buddha. The river was wide at this time of year. I quickly went back to the ferry driver and said, Uncle, I think there's a drowned body in the middle of the river. The ferry driver glared at me. Is it your business? Let it be. If it's floating like this, someone will net it or retrieve it anyway. We're waiting for passengers, we can't stop for that. I glanced around and saw fishing boats and nets of all kinds docked near the ferry, belonging to local fishermen who made their living nearby. But I didn't understand why the bodies were so dark. I was about to say something else when the corpse floated past right in front of us. Many people even took out their phones to snap pictures. The ferry driver also watched, but then focused on docking the ferry. Seeing how difficult he was, I didn't bother to say anything more. The ferry docked, people got on and off, engines rumbled, and familiar laughter mingled with the sounds of vehicles. The body that had been floating on the river was now out of sight. The Red River lay calm and placid, as if it had never held a life that had just extinguished itself. The river didn't stop to mourn anyone. It simply did its job, flowing. I stood watching for a while, then turned away, not out of indifference, but because I realized there was nothing more I could do. I didn't know who would retrieve that drowned body or what would become of it. Still, I felt a pang of sadness. A human life had just passed before my eyes, in front of dozens of people, and everything happened so swiftly, so cruelly. The death of others is often just a fleeting image on the journey of those who still live. That's just how life works. The second accident happened just over a kilometer from the ferry landing, right before my eyes. I was riding my motorbike off the ferry onto the road. This stretch of road was very bad, full of potholes and large ruts from heavy trucks carrying sand, bricks, and gravel. Construction materials covered the trees along the roadside like a thick film, from machines working day and night. My mind was still reeling from the floating body. But then, from behind, I suddenly heard the roar of motorbikes revving, followed by blaring horns. I thought, oh, it's just those young hooligans again. They're just teenagers, they don't know fear, probably showing off for their girlfriends on the way home from school. I used to be like them myself. Everyone has to be foolish a few times to learn. I swerved to the side of the road, glancing in my rearview mirror. There were 2 motorbikes, ridden by young boys still in school uniforms, weaving dangerously, standing on their seats. Each boy had a girlfriend clinging tightly to his back. The bike shot past, but disaster struck. The road was terrible and they couldn't react in time. Both bikes collided. One, carrying 2 people, crashed into the roadside embankment, while the other lay sprawled across the road. Just then, a sand truck, whose driver had only heard the loud noise and terrified screams, pulled over. The girl on the back of one bike was lucky, only suffering minor scrapes. When she scrambled up, she saw her boyfriend's body, dismembered, and she screamed before fainting. But the boy wasn't so lucky. He lay under the wheels of the truck, his body crushed, blood flowing profusely across the road. I was truly stunned, unable to describe the feeling of witnessing a living, breathing person, alive moments before, lying shattered in front of me in an instant. It took a long while before I regained my composure. The crowd gathered. Some sighed, some shook their heads, some muttered, "Poor thing," and then turned and walked away. I, along with a few others, ran down the embankment to help the 2 boys and push the motorbike up. Then we asked about their families and told them to call for help. The truck driver jumped down, looking pale and distraught, fumbling for his phone to call someone. After a moment, traffic police arrived, measured the scene, and then a vehicle came to take the student's body away. Of course, I didn't stay to watch the entire process because there was nothing worth seeing. The person was dead. I wasn't scared exactly, just a bit nauseated. I didn't feel sorry for the student. In one impulsive moment, he had lost his life, his entire future gone, leaving only endless grief for his loved ones. The road from the countryside to Hanoi is also over 20 kilometers. Normally, it only takes me about 30 minutes. I know the route so well. But that day, I don't know why my mind was adrift, constantly troubled by the two deaths I'd witnessed that morning, happening within mere minutes of each other. How on earth did I end up getting lost and going all the way to Gia Lam, driving straight to Bat Trang, only to realize I had to go home? If you believe in superstitions, you'd say a ghost led me astray, no joke. I had to turn back, take the Lin Nam Road through Home My Market, but when I reached Than Tri Bridge, I witnessed yet another serious accident. This time, it was a woman. As we passed, she was already covered with a sheet, her brains spilled across the road. I had witnessed many accidents before, some railway accidents even more horrific, but never had I seen so many consecutive deaths in just one day. I don't know what to say. Perhaps I am just too sensitive. 3 people, 3 fates, 3 lives extinguished right before my eyes without a single farewell, no one able to say a last word. Everything happened so quickly and brutally, as if death were just an extra step in life's familiar cycle. The dead remain, the living watch for a moment, sigh, and then continue on their way to their own tasks. Cars still drove, roads were still busy, the city was still noisy, as if nothing had happened. Only I, amidst the crowd, suddenly felt an emptiness in my heart, a strange feeling. Not fear, not excessive pity, but a bitter realization of how ordinary death ultimately is in this life. Perhaps that's why humans invented ghosts, spirits, and body possession, not necessarily because they believe, but because they are afraid of the stark reality that a human life can vanish so quickly, leaving no trace but dried blood on the road. The line between being and not being, between holding and letting go, is so fragile that just a slight shock from fate is enough to shatter it. I don't know why I felt so pensive then, lost in thought. Just then my phone rang. It was my wife. Startled, I answered. She immediately scolded, "Where are you? Did you just crawl out onto the road to Hanoi? Are you going to be able to pick up the kids from school? I need to know." I replied, "I'm almost home. There were a few accidents, so traffic was bad. I'll be home in about 15 minutes. You pick up the kids, go to work later. The breakfast I made is on the table for you." As I was about to hang up, I added, "Be careful on the road, okay? There were a lot of accidents. Text me when you get to work." She paused, then chuckled. "Oh, my writer husband is worried about me, huh? You never warn me on a normal day. I know, you be careful too." My wife often jokingly calls me the writer, because I sometimes write poems and post them online. I always say I'm poet-brained. Perhaps writing too much makes one a bit scatterbrained, and it's not wrong. I'm serious, I'm not joking. I'll tell you some really strange stories when I get home. With that, I hung up. After a struggle, I finally made it home. The first thing I did was take a quick shower because my whole body reeked of vomit from the night before. Thankfully, I made it home safely, though my breath still reeked of sapodilla. Luckily, my wife didn't notice. Otherwise, she would have nagged my ears off. Every time I get drunk, I swear I'll never drink again, but somehow that vow never holds. A few days later, I'm back at it. After showering, I went downstairs for breakfast. My wife bought me a rice dumpling, but as she took a bite, she heard footsteps running outside. Listening closely, she heard the neighbors talking about someone dying. I immediately ran to open the door and saw Mrs. Susan, our next-door neighbor, her face pale, lips bloodless. "Uncle, quickly, go see what happened to Mr. Khang. He's dead. Please go check for me. I'll go tell everyone." "Auntie, are you joking? Dead? How? How can I joke about this, nephew? I just bought him some porridge." He ate it and then collapsed into the armchair. I touched him, and he was stiff and cold. He hasn't reacted at all since. Please, go check him for me. Mrs. Susan in our neighborhood was like a walking camera. Her husband died early, and her children married and moved far away, so she lived alone. Despite her age, she was still very agile and knew everything that happened in the neighborhood. She was kind-hearted but a bit stingy. When my children were small, I often asked her to look after them. The Mr. Khang she just mentioned was her younger brother. Mr. Khang was about 60, with no wife or children. He had a stroke once before but was still quite fit. His speech was a little slurred, and his legs were a bit weak, but he wasn't paralyzed like many others. Every day, he would still walk around the neighborhood for exercise. Since his family was originally from here, they still owned a lot of land. And since he had no wife or children ever since he fell ill, his siblings and relatives sold a piece of land, put the money in the bank, and used the interest for his monthly living expenses. They also hired a caregiver. However, he had a somewhat erratic temperament and was very picky, so many people were afraid of him. Although the pay was good, caregivers only lasted for half a month or so. It turned out they were afraid of Mr. Khang's intense gaze and occasional physical outbursts. He was also quite funny to me. I often visited Mr. Khang because his hand was a bit weak from the stroke, and he frequently visited massage parlors. So every time he saw me, he would say, "Come to the massage parlor with me, choose whatever girl you want, I'll pay. You can massage them until your hands ache." But I had never actually gone with him. To joke with him, I'd say, "Uncle, you've had a stroke and you want to go to a massage parlor with me? If I take you there and you see all those pretty, scantily clad girls and have another stroke, I'd be in deep trouble. Even if I jumped into the river to drown myself, it wouldn't be enough to atone for my sin." Yet, every time he saw me, he would invite me, which was quite something. Hearing Mrs. Susan, I immediately ran to Mr. Khang's house to see what was happening. His house was very clean. He took care of his personal hygiene himself. His house was also cleaned by a caregiver, so it wasn't too bad. However, despite everything, I wasn't a blood relative, so I still felt a shiver down my spine. The door was closed, leaving the inside dark. I stepped into the house alone, slowly making my way to the bed where Mr. Khang lay. Under the mosquito net, through the blue fabric, I saw a man with salt and pepper hair and a pale complexion. One leg, thin and bent, was draped across his chest. He was facing the wall, his arms crossed. There was something red, perhaps blood, on his lips. His eyes were closed. Mr. Khang, don't you want to go to the massage parlor with your nephew? There's a new place, very nice." I deliberately spoke humorously to ease my fear. When Mrs. Susan said he was dead, I didn't feel anything. That was a lie. But because we were close neighbors, seeing each other often, if Mrs. Susan asked me to check and I didn't, I would lose face. Besides, I didn't believe he could die so quickly. However, after calling out several times and getting no response, I sensed something was wrong, but I still gathered my courage to touch his feet to check. His body was stiff like a log, his feet pale and icy cold, making me jump and retract my hand. I thought to myself, he must have been gone for several hours. Immediately, I ran outside, shouting in panic. But there were hardly any people left in the neighborhood. The adults were at work, the children at school, only a few elderly people remained at home. Mrs. Susan's children and grandchildren were also returning home by then. Seeing me, she immediately asked, "Is it true about Mr. Khang?" I said nothing, just nodded slightly. "Oh, Mr. Khang, why did you leave your sister like this? All that money and property, who will spend it now, dear brother?" My own nephew called Mr. Khang Uncle and jokingly told Mrs. Susan, who was crying, "If Uncle Khang can't spend it, give it to me. If I can't spend it, then you aunts and uncles can spend it. Why are you making such a fuss?" Mrs. Susan glared at her nephew. He was so rich, but he didn't even know how to spend money. So what's the point of having so much money? You rude child, that's your Uncle Khang. You've never visited him your whole life, and now you want to spend his money? He won't give you anything. I asked him for money many times and never got anything. Mrs. Susan scolded her nephew, making everyone present chuckle. Everyone was trying to maintain a serious face at this funeral. I was no exception. "Why don't you go check on your uncle, see if he's really gone? You startled him. Your uncle died, and you're so indifferent." "Good heavens, even this young man here pointing at me has gone in there," I just said. "You should go check yourself. I'm not a professional." Andy was indeed a stubborn and rebellious type. He drank 3 meals a day, his eyes constantly bloodshot from addiction. Honestly, I didn't like this guy much. Although he was from the village, I rarely saw him because he spent more time in prison or at rehab than at home. He looked a bit surprised to see me this time. Perhaps he had just returned from another stint at rehab. "Oh, Auntie, he had no wife, no children, suffered every day, old and frail, constantly wandering. Luckily, he died at home. I was only afraid he'd die on the road or in the market. Every time I visited him, he'd just curse at me. His death is a relief for everyone. His siblings didn't have to take care of him, did they? Am I right?" Mrs. Susan was furious but didn't know how to refute him. It's true what they say. Don't listen to stories from artists, but don't listen to explanations from an addict either. Andy said, his eyes darting around, then walked into the house. I don't know if he had a fight with Mr. Khang or if Mr. Khang disliked him for his wild ways and addiction. Or perhaps there was another reason. He didn't even check on Mr. Khang, but sat down right by the door, pulling out a cigarette and offering it to me. "Have a smoke, uncle, to freshen your mouth." "No, I don't smoke. Do you have anything that smells better than this? Cigarettes stink up your mouth. I mocked him, making him look at me for a moment, then laugh. Did you just move here, uncle? I don't recognize you. Where's your house? No, I've been here for over 10 years and in Hanoi for over 20 years. My house is right here, I said, pointing to my house, which was directly opposite Mr. Khang's, but talking small talk with this guy felt off. I don't know if it was because he'd spent so much time in prison, but his tone was very irritating, like those show-off idols. After a few sentences, I moved away, not wanting to continue the conversation, especially with his shifty eyes. I feared he might try to break into my house later. A while later, Mr. Khang's relatives heard the news and arrived. They discussed and planned the funeral. Some went to order the funeral tent, others went to consult a geomancer, and soon everyone had a task. Mrs. Susan told me, "Nephew, please stay here and help me with whatever you can. Move the belongings outside so people can take them later." I agreed. As a good neighbor, I should help. "What time did you find him, nephew?" she asked a few steps later. I was taken aback, unsure how to answer, so I just guessed. "I just found him now. His hands and feet are cold, his body is stiff, so it must have been a few hours, Auntie. But why did I see something red like blood on his mouth?" Mrs. Susan immediately replied, "That's not blood. Yesterday, he wanted to eat pig's blood pudding, so I made him a bowl, and he had some red dragon fruit. He probably fell after eating and didn't have time to rinse his mouth." "Does Mr. Khang have any other illness besides the stroke that would cause bleeding?" I didn't say anything, just nodded. "Okay, Auntie, you go take care of the arrangements. Leave this to me. It's nothing." Andy and I then started moving things out of the house. The house was old, but since Mr. Khang lived alone, there weren't many belongings. Inside, there was a TV and a pair of speakers that looked quite fancy. Andy, eyes darting left and right, immediately carried out the speakers and told me, "Uncle, I have to go do something quickly. I'll be right back. You can keep cleaning up." I swore I utterly despised this guy. In my head, I thought, I hope Mr. Khang comes back and chokes you to death for stealing his speakers. You've been eyeing them for a long time, and now that Mr. Khang is dead, you're taking advantage. But he was her nephew, so I couldn't say anything. At this point, I was alone in the house, with only one more gas cylinder left to move. This cylinder had been fixed by Mr. Khang himself, with a hose passing through a kitchen counter. The old valve was a bit rusty, so it took quite a while to unscrew. Honestly, I felt a bit spooked then, being alone in Mr. Khang's house with a recently deceased person. I wasn't making it up that I was scared. The fear only made me fumble more. It took me a while to unscrew the tight nut and remove the rubber hose from the valve. My hands were shaking, and I didn't want to look at the bed where he lay, but the more I tried not to, the more my fear pulled my gaze in that direction. As I carried the cylinder out, my eyes inadvertently flickered towards Mr. Khang's bed. I nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw his head was turned away again. I distinctly remembered that morning when I rushed in to check on him, he was facing the wall. Or did I remember wrong? But at this point, goosebumps erupted all over my body. I immediately carried the cylinder outside. I turned to go back in for the remaining gas tank, but just as I lifted it, I heard breathing and a slight movement from behind me. I can't describe how terrifying the feeling was. I secretly turned my head to look at Mr. Khang's body and saw a horrifying sight that I will probably never forget. On the bed, a black cat weighing about 2 kilograms suddenly appeared. Mr. Khang had raised this cat from when it was small. It was very clever. It sat on Mr. Khang's chest, then let out a few cries. Mr. Khang's eyes opened wide, staring blankly at me. His hand lifted and his mouth mumbled, "Thief! Thief! Thief!" Honestly, no words can describe my horror at that moment. A series of stories about body possession involving black cats flashed through my mind. And at that moment, an event that seemed only to happen in movies was unfolding right before my eyes. The gas cylinder in my hand fell to the ground with a loud clang. I immediately screamed and ran out. Just then, some of Mr. Khang's relatives began to arrive. I stammered, "Inside. Mr. Khang? Body possession. Mr. Khang is alive again." Mrs. Susan, holding a picture of Buddha, stared at me with wide eyes and asked, "What's going on?" My face was ashen, my knees knocking together. I pointed inside. "Auntie, go inside and see. Mr. Khang is alive." Immediately, Mr. Khang's relatives rushed in to check. Indeed, he was still breathing, so a few family members quickly rubbed oil on him. Someone even called an ambulance. 10 minutes later, he was taken to the hospital. After the emergency services left, the coffin from the funeral home also arrived. Everyone was dumbfounded. Mrs. Susan told the funeral home staff to take it back, explaining that they didn't know if Mr. Khang was truly alive or not yet. The coffin salesman, however, presented the invoice and said, "Auntie, please understand. I have another customer tomorrow, and if I just abandon this order, I'm dead. Besides, I'm just a driver for them." Mrs. Susan found this amusing. "This guy is funny, isn't he? He's not even dead yet. Why would we take a coffin? Please, just take it back. My brother isn't gone yet. If you leave the coffin here, that's what's truly funny." The man replied, "You told me to deliver it early, and now you're doing this. Who would accept that? How much money do you think I'm making for you to do this?" The man spoke mysterious words. "I'm telling you, my boss dreamed last night that an old man who had a stroke would come to him, so he cleaned this coffin up nicely. This isn't just a random delivery. His name is Nguyen Van Khang, born in '65, lives at this exact address. My boss told me this morning that you would be here. I'm telling you, if you don't take it, you'll regret it." Hearing this, everyone was surprised. I don't know if this guy was just making things up to avoid carrying it back. Mrs. Susan was about to say something, but a man who looked like her brother spoke up. "All right, sis, you don't know what Mr. Khang's condition is yet. What if things go wrong at the hospital? Just leave the coffin here, what's the harm? They've carried it all the way here with so much effort. Just put the coffin in the corner of the house, it'll be fine. Don't be so superstitious." The man speaking was Mr. David, Mrs. Susan's older brother and Mr. Khang's elder brother. "Brother David is right, Sister Susan," he added. Mrs. Susan mumbled a few things, then took out money to pay. Inside the coffin, there were already all the paper offerings, tea, betel nuts, and other items for the funeral rites. I was asked to help carry the coffin inside. Bending down under the bed, I saw the black cat and called it out. But the cat was very shy. It stayed hidden, its green eyes peeking out. I then told Mrs. Susan, "Auntie, I have something to tell you. Please don't laugh, okay? What is it?" This morning, I was scared out of my wits. The black cat jumped over Mr. Khang's body, and this morning, you and I both checked, and he was clearly dead. Could it be body possession? Mrs. Susan turned pale and immediately told Mr. David. Mr. David, who was over 70, glared at his sister and scolded, "Good heavens, in this day and age, you still believe in such superstitions. You're always talking nonsense. A stroke, cold limbs, that's normal. A black cat possessing a body, that's just wild, unfounded rumors." I didn't know what to say either since it was their family matter. But for some reason, I was extremely scared, especially when he opened his eyes and mumbled, "Thief, thief, thief." Oh my God, luckily I had gone to the bathroom earlier, or I would have peed my pants. When the ambulance took Mr. Khang away from the neighborhood, some relatives followed him to the hospital to handle procedures, as Mr. Khang had no wife or children, so his siblings took turns looking after him. Luckily, he had money. Honestly, if he didn't, he probably would have died long ago, instead of waiting until now. That day, I witnessed too many strange events, 3 people dying right before my eyes, then my neighbor Mr. Khang dying and coming back to life. I suddenly felt a shiver, a complete lack of understanding. I saw a basin of grapefruit leaves burning, smoke rising. I approached it, holding my hands over the smoke, letting it cling to me, my mind still racing with thoughts. Mr. Khang's relatives, who were just arguing over the coffin, now stood huddled together. Each had a different expression, but all shared the same look of bewilderment. Mr. David, Mrs. Susan, and Mrs. Tina, the youngest sister, and a few other relatives looked extremely anxious. Suddenly, someone spoke up, asking Mrs. Susan and Mrs. Tina, Andy the addict's mother, "What kind of bad omen did you have this morning that Mr. Khang died? He wasn't dead, he's still strong, he won't die yet. You're exaggerating." Andy, her son, who was standing outside, his eyes darting like a thief, looked at the pile of belongings they had moved out. He probably intended to steal more of Mr. Khang's things, looking utterly villainous. Mrs. Susan didn't answer Mrs. Tina's question but pointed at me. "If you don't believe me, ask this nephew here. He went in and checked himself. He was clearly dead, wasn't he?" Everyone's eyes turned to me. Mrs. Tina was also a rather petty and feisty character in the village. Mr. Khang was her elder brother, but she rarely visited him. Yet she always pretended to be concerned about others, always afraid of what people would think of her, that kind of person. You're always giving advice, yet you're scared of a dead person. Next time, you'll be scared of a corpse's nose. I'm telling you, I was genuinely scared, and besides, I'm not a blood relative like you. I've seen you live so close by for so long, and I've never seen you visit Mr. Khang. Only Auntie Susan goes to see him. He's so sick, who knows when he'll go. When I said that, Mrs. Tina seemed embarrassed and moved away. Just then, the black cat ran out of the house and let out a series of desperate cries directed at Mrs. Tina, startling everyone. "Your family made this, huh?" Andy, Mrs. Tina's son, without anyone noticing, picked up a stick and swung it at the cat. The poor creature only had time to let out one cry, then rolled over a few times before stiffening completely. Blood flowed from its mouth, forming a puddle before everyone's stunned eyes. I also jumped. "Andy, what are you doing?" "Why did you hit the cat?" Mrs. Susan immediately went to the cat's side, but it was already dead. "Oh dear, humans can't even fight back, let alone cats. Ugh, it's always stirring up trouble. It was howling like it was crazy, it deserved to be hit. Kill it or it'll bring bad luck." Mrs. Tina spoke up, defending her son. She then approached, picked up the cat, and put it in a plastic bag. "Mom and son, you're so cruel. What if Mr. Khang comes back, Andy? Don't you know he's raised that cat for almost 10 years? Oh, forget it, dead is dead. Are you crying for the cat or pitying your brother? To me, it's just an animal. It seemed like it wanted to bite someone, so if I didn't kill it, what would I do?" Mrs. Tina was incredibly stubborn, speaking harsh words to Mrs. Susan. I watched her put the dead cat in the bag and place it on the motorbike, then leave without even greeting anyone. She even revved the engine loudly, as if to provoke everyone. Mr. David and Mrs. Susan sighed and shook their heads at their rude nephew. Mrs. Tina said, "It's good that Uncle Khang isn't dead. I'm going home now." Mr. David then asked, "Are you all going to take turns looking after Mr. Khang? We're a family, but we're not even as good as outsiders. How can that be?" "Oh, I'm busy. Uncle Khang has plenty of money. Just tell him to hire a nurse." After saying that, Mrs. Tina huffily walked away, leaving everyone whom she called family stunned. "You're his sister, Tina. How can you say that?" At this, it seemed I had hit a nerve, and I suddenly glared at Mr. David and shouted, "Brother David, how can you say such words to us? You and the two sisters inherited the most. Look, Mrs. Susan and I married and went to live with our husbands, giving up all the land our parents left us to you two brothers. Yet you sold it and didn't even give us a candy or a box of cakes. Get out of here. I don't have a sister like you. No wonder people say a snake knows its own hole. You always chant scriptures and pray to Buddha, but your heart is so wicked. None of your business. Who are you to talk? What kind of life do you live anyway?" Mrs. Tina was about to say more, but Mr. David bent down and picked up his long pipe, ready to strike. Seeing this, I quickly pulled Mrs. Tina behind me. Then many people rushed to intervene. If she got hit by that pipe, Mrs. Tina would be dead. "Auntie, go home and talk later. You've said too much." Mrs. Susan was also annoyed with Mrs. Tina now, pulling her sister's arm away out of Mr. David's sight. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Mr. David's face was flushed red, showing extreme anger. He sat heavily on the chair, speechless. Everyone gradually dispersed and left. Many just shook their heads and sighed. As far as I know, Mr. Khang's parents were wealthy back then, but they discriminated against their children, treating them unfairly. They gave almost all the land to the two elder sons, making the two daughters furious, especially Mrs. Tina. Although her husband's family was also rich, her sons were wild and constantly provoked their mother. In fact, they themselves looked down on their two uncles. It's no coincidence that people link money and silver together because money is so fickle. The vast land that the two brothers took, they didn't share anything with their sisters, leading to this dispute. A while later, Mr. David also left. Now, only Mrs. Susan remained. There was truly no affection between these siblings. In general, I felt it was very superficial, almost like they were strangers. Back at my house, opposite Mr. Khang's, I looked inside his house and saw the coffin sitting ominously in the corner, covered with a green tarp, looking both superfluous and irritating. In my hometown, elderly people used to make their own coffins in advance. But that was decades ago. Now, no one does that anymore. Just call a service and they'll be there in minutes. The funeral had not even begun, but the smell of paper offerings, new wood, and coffin paint lingered in the air, creating a very uncomfortable feeling, like a funeral suspended in limbo, not knowing who it was for. Standing by my gate, I reviewed all the strange events of that morning and couldn't help but shiver. I lit a cigarette, took a deep drag to calm myself, but for some reason, my heart beat even faster than before. I don't know if I was haunted by some story about body possession I had heard somewhere, but the events that morning with Mr. Khang, how similar they were. Images of Mr. Khang repeated in my head like a glitching film, the black cat sitting on his chest, the cat's hoarse cries, his wide, staring eyes, and the hoarse, choked sound from his throat uttering 3 words, "Thief, Thief, thief. If only I had seen it, I might have thought I was hallucinating. But Mrs. Susan also said he was truly dead. Yet the cat he had raised for so many years licked him, and he came back to life. It was so absurd and illogical. If I hadn't witnessed it firsthand, I would surely have cursed the storyteller for making things up. I don't know what to make of this story. Perhaps it was just a coincidence because Mr. Khang wasn't truly dead. Or perhaps I was just too scared and my mind was playing tricks on me. Mrs. Susan took Mrs. Tina home and returned a while later, asking me, "Where did everyone go, nephew?" I replied, "They all went home, Auntie. Has there been any news since they took Mr. Khang to the hospital?" "It's strange, isn't it? This morning, you and I both confirmed he was gone, yet he still came back to life, so he truly wasn't dead." Mrs. Susan looked at me, her eyes deep set, her face still a bit red. "My daughter just called. Mr. Khang is out of critical condition. The doctor said it was a stroke combined with extreme exhaustion and a weak pulse, so he was mistaken for dead. If they had been a bit slower, or if he hadn't been rubbed with stimulating oil in time, this time he would have been truly gone." However, I still felt something was off, somewhere. From that day on, no one stayed at Mr. Khang's house. Mrs. Susan and Mr. David went to the hospital to look after Mr. Khang. Mrs. Tina lived in the lower part of the village, and I didn't know if she went to the hospital. The house was locked, leaving everything as it was that morning, including the coffin still in the corner. The belongings outside were covered with a tarp, not moved back inside. They weren't worried about theft because security in our neighborhood was quite good. If anything went missing, it could only be Andy, Mr. Khang's nephew, no one else. I looked through the window of my house and saw the blue tarp covering the coffin in the faint streetlight, my heart churning with unease. That night, I slept fitfully, not knowing why I felt so unusually anxious. Throughout the night, I heard a cat meowing. But when I opened the door, there was no cat to be seen. Only Mr. Khang's house, dark and silent, as if nothing had ever happened. I didn't tell my wife about this because she was easily scared and I didn't want to worry her. I also didn't tell her about the accidents and deaths from that morning. Several days later, Mr. Khang was brought home. He looked much thinner, his face pale, lips dark, but his eyes were strangely clear, not dull like someone who had suffered a severe stroke. He wasn't as agile as a healthy person, but his eyes were like someone who had just woken up from a very long dream. He didn't speak much. If anyone asked, he would just nod or shake his head. Occasionally, he would stare intently at one spot for a long time, only to startle and turn away when someone called him. In general, it was very strange. I asked people where the black cat was, but no one dared to say that Mr. Khang's nephew had beaten it to death. This made me feel increasingly uneasy, starting from the second week. One night, around midnight, I was lying in bed when I heard a knocking sound from Mr. Khang's house. I lay still and listened for a moment, then the knocking stopped. I reassured myself that it was probably just the wind or the cat knocking something over. But the next night, at the same time, the knocking sounded again. And this time, I heard a distinct scraping sound from his house. I didn't understand what was happening. The next morning, I met Mr. Khang outside. He was leaning on his cane, walking slowly. I playfully asked, half joking, "Mr. Khang, are you going to karaoke at the massage parlor with your nephew?" "I just found a new place. The girls are big and beautiful." He stared at me for a long time, then quietly said, "That scoundrel, do you know where my cat is? It's strange. I've had it for almost 10 years and it's never run away anywhere. I don't know, maybe it's in heat looking for a mate." I intentionally changed the subject, then asked, "What have you been doing these past few nights, making so much noise in your house in the middle of the night?" Mr. Khang looked at me intently, his voice perfectly normal, but it sent shivers down my spine. "I feel more comfortable in there, it's very warm. Why don't you buy one and lie in it too? And I know my cat was killed. I was just about to find out." After saying that, he burst into tears, then looked up and asked me, "Did he take my speakers too?" My scalp tingled. I didn't know if his family told him, but I suspected not, because Mrs. Susan had warned everyone not to say anything. A few days later, Mr. Khang fell seriously ill again. This time, it was a severe stroke. Half of his body was stiff and he couldn't speak, but his eyes were remarkably clear. Anyone who entered his room, he would stare at them, especially if they stood near the coffin. On the 19th day of the month, Mr. Khang died. This time, there was no coming back to life. Doctors clearly confirmed his death. When he died, all his relatives were present this time, gathered solemnly. When they performed the embalming, they discovered a small wooden box at the bottom of the coffin. Andy was the first to open it. He probably thought it contained gold or jewels because Mr. Khang was very rich. He wore designer clothes, gold Rolex watches, and had plenty of gold chains and other valuables. But ever since his stroke, no one knew where these items had gone or who had taken them. Andy excitedly opened the box, but contrary to his expectations, it only contained an old cat collar and a small piece of paper folded into four. On it was scrawled a single sentence. "It called me back. Give me back my things." Andy's face turned ashen. He trembled, looking at his uncle lying on the bed, unable to utter a word. No one else in the house dared to ask either. The note was placed back in the wooden box and left inside the coffin, beneath Mr. Khang's head. That afternoon, when Mr. Khang's body was taken to the funeral hall, his house was locked. Mrs. Susan was picked up by her daughter to live with her, but I think there were other reasons, not just that. She had told me she would never leave. But now, her brother had just died, and she left immediately, which was strange. After Mr. Khang's funeral, our neighborhood quickly returned to normal activities, as if everything was formally concluded. Only I felt that it wasn't over. At night, every time I turned off the lights to sleep, I still felt as if someone across the street was standing there, watching. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would hear the cat's desperate wails. It was generally hard to describe. A week after the funeral, around 9 p.m., I was sitting in my house when I heard a motorbike stop outside. I opened the door and saw Andy the addict. He looked noticeably thinner. I don't know if it was from drug use, but his eyes were sunken and his face was pale. On his motorbike, he was carrying the exact pair of speakers he had taken earlier. They weren't tied down, just precariously balanced on the back seat. He stopped his bike in front of Mr. Khang's house, then ran quickly to Mrs. Susan's house, but immediately returned. He asked, "Do you know where Mrs. Susan went?" "Mrs. Susan's daughter picked her up to live with her. She told me a few days ago." He glanced at Mr. Khang's house, then told me, "Can I leave this here with you, Uncle? Why are you returning them? I thought you took those fancy speakers home." He didn't answer immediately. He secretly glanced at Mr. Khang's house, then said, "I can't use them." I looked at the speakers. On the wooden surface, there was a long scratch like a cat's claw mark. Not just one mark, but many overlapping marks. They were expensive speakers, too. At this, he looked up at me. His eyes gave me goosebumps. There was no life in them. I don't know if he had just used drugs, but he stammered, "Uncle, these past few nights, I've heard the speakers turning on by themselves." "I mean, the power button was on, yes, but this is ridiculous." He shook his head vigorously, insisting. "At first, I thought the power button was on, so I turned it off and unplugged it. But every night, I still hear the sound." He lowered his voice as if afraid I would hear. "It's not music, Uncle, it's knocking and scratching from inside the speakers." I remained silent, glancing down at the claw marks, feeling very uneasy. "Sometimes I even hear the cat meowing," Andy continued. "But I know that cat is dead. You saw me kill it yourself." He paused, trembling visibly. "Ever since then, I've had terrible luck. I tried gambling a few times, but yesterday night I dreamt of Uncle Khang. He was sitting on the coffin, not looking at me. He just pointed at the speakers and said, 'This isn't yours.' I was speechless, my head felt numb. 'I'm returning them, Uncle. Can I leave them here at your house? I'll ask my mom to bring the key to open the door.' He turned his bike on and left quickly, disappearing faster than he had taken Mr. Khang's speakers. I stood there, staring at the speakers for a long time. The door to Mr. Khang's house was closed, and I didn't have the key. To be frank, I was also scared. If Andy brought them back, I'd be dead. And I still had a feeling that Mr. Khang was still in that house. Before I knew what to do, Mr. David, Mrs. Tina, and Mrs. Susan all appeared. Their faces were all pale, as if they hadn't slept, and they looked terrified. I told them, aunties, uncles, Andy, Mrs. Tina's son, just returned Mr. Khang's speakers. The three of them looked at each other, startled. No one said anything, but I knew for sure that Mr. Khang's ghost had demanded something from them too. A few days earlier, I had seen Mr. David wearing a very expensive gold watch with a crown logo, but now he wasn't wearing it. Instead, he carried a watch box. Mrs. Susan was also carrying a handbag, and so was Mrs. Tina. Although I didn't know what they were, I guessed they probably contained Mr. Khang's gold and jewels from before. They probably also suffered from Mr. Khang's ghost demanding his things back, so they had to return them. They placed them neatly on the table. After writing this story, for a poor writer like me, sometimes I even thought of moving into Mr. Khang's house. But I was quite scared. What if, after finally moving all my things in the middle of the night, He knocked on the door and demanded his belongings back until I was out of breath.